Is paganism experiencing a revival in America and in the West? Is the world becoming re-enchanted again? And are the old gods coming back? That's what we're going to talk about tonight on the Kirkwood Center podcast for Theology and Ethics with our partners, Reasonable Truth Apologetics, run by our good friend Prashanth Daniel, who's joining us tonight, and his colleague and also a good friend of ours, Carlos Pamplona, couldn't be here tonight. But we're going to be talking about these topics and an upcoming conference that Reasonable Truth is putting on in a few weeks, or actually on April 12th, not even a few weeks, right around the corner, where the Kirkwood Center fellows, Jacob, Daniel, and myself will be joining Carlos, Prashanth, and a few others dealing with this very important and significant topic. Prashanth, before we start to talk about the conference and the kinds of things that we're going to be dealing with, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? First of all, welcome. I'm supposed to say that. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Tony.
It's been a few years since we had you on. But why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Reasonable Truth?
Yeah, of course. Well, thanks a lot, Tony, Jacob, for having me. It's great to be here again. Like you said, yeah, it's been a while. I'm trying to remember how long it's been exactly. Probably a year and a half, maybe 2 years-ish, something like that.
We did a review of ETS 2023. So it was in 2023 the last time.
Was Lenny on? I'm trying to remember if he was on or not, but
I think it was.
It was a good discussion. It was good. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, I'm the president and founder of Reasonable Truth, and we are a very, very baby ministry. We started in 2021, but yeah, our vision is to really help Christians understand, articulate, and defend their faith as winsome ambassadors of the gospel. And we really feel like the space that we are called to do that in is actually kind of similar to you guys at Kirkwood. Is we want to try to build a bridge between academia and the church, because we've always felt like the church sort of needs the expertise and the sophisticated knowledge of academia, but at the same time, academia needs the moral foundations and the framework of the church. So that's kind of always been our goal, to try to operate in that space and try to bring those two together. But yeah, it's God's been blessing us. We've been doing good. We're growing slowly, and it's great to be part of that journey.
Well, and Prashanth, so I have to say, you and I met, and our other friend and now celebrity apologist, Wes Huff. I'm still trying to get Wes back on. We've been going back and forth on Facebook, and he's just like, dude, I'm so busy. I really want to, but I'm just, so we understand that Wes has a heavy load to bear now. But we met, I think it's about 8 years ago now, at a ministry that will go unnamed, as I've said before. But yeah, it's been good, and we don't get to see each other often, but when we do, we always have a good time and some great discussions. So it's good to have you on. Dr. Jacob Daniel, the only doctor in the house, I think. And Jacob, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do with Kirkwood?
So I'm Jacob Daniel. I just need to clarify something, that though Prashanth and we have the same last name, we are not biologically related in any way, but we are related in Christ. So yes, that's what brings us here together. So Jacob Daniel, I'm one of the fellows with Kirkwood Center for Ethics and Theology. It's always an honor to work with my brothers here. And as Prashanth mentioned, our goal is to bridge that gap between the academia and the church, and to bring believers to a place where they can engage with the culture robustly and bring the message of the gospel in a manner that it flourishes the society, at the same time focuses our culture back to Christ.
Well, and that's what we've been trying to do. And one topic, one phenomenon that I think is on many people's minds that we started really thinking about. I started thinking about it in 2022 when I was actually writing some articles on critical race theory. And I was noticing some aspects of critical theory that seemed to me to open the door to a pagan worldview. Now, we'll try and define that a little bit here, but we all, and have thought that this was such an important topic that Prashanth and Carlos and the guys at Reasonable Truth, they went ahead and scheduled, and you guys have had apologetics conferences in the past 2 years now, but this next one you've decided needs to be on the rise of neo-paganism. And I think, and we agreed that was definitely a topic the church needs to start thinking about. I might even say thinking about again, in the sense of there is a sense where the church has dealt with paganism before, not just in the distant past, maybe in the days of the early church, but also in different cultures in the present time, right? In, missionary cultures in places like Africa, Central Asia, and so on and so forth, where maybe folk religion is still very vibrant amongst the local populace. So, but Prashanth, why don't we do this? So why don't we let you tell us and tell the audience why you guys thought that we needed to do this conference on April 12th. What are you seeing?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Tony. So this actually kind of got on my radar also around the same time, around early 2022. Actually, maybe even a little before that. And to me, I started seeing glimpses of it in different places. I started seeing it, of course, like you said, in the CRT area. I started seeing it in the abortion movement, in the transgender movement. Obviously, environmentalism has always been a sort of a cesspool for this kind of thought. So I've been seeing glimpses of that everywhere. And then, for whatever reason, in the years between 2020 and 2024, we will leave out whatever political administration was in power, needless to say, what created the right sort of climate, if you will, for these sorts of ideas to rise to the surface. And so I think one of the things that I started to notice was not just these practices, but almost a sort of like a lionization, like a deification of some of these ideas in the marketplace. Like for example, in the abortion movement, it wasn't just a choice that a woman could make, but it was almost like this sacrosanct sort of thing that was a holy grail. Like nobody was allowed to touch that, And right. I saw the same sort of movement in transgenderism. And I'm starting to think, why are these movements being deified with almost a sort of sacredness? What is going on here? It's almost like a cult-like, following, and it's got its own sort of doctrine. It's got its own dogma, and priests and sacraments and all these things. And that's when I sort of started to think to myself, oh wait, this is looking very pagan. This is looking like some of the older gods are coming back, if you will, albeit in different avatars. But anyways, that's kind of what put it on our radar. And then, of course, I noticed that a few people, like here and there are very sparse voices talking about it. You were one of those voices who were kind of starting to talk about these things. And that's about the time when Carlos and I started talking about these things as well. And we were like, these movements are so loud and boisterous and militant and activist, but with a sort of dogmatic backing that we were like, okay, these things need to be addressed. I'm not sure the church is paying attention to these sorts of things. And if we are, we're kind of relegating it to the political sphere. And this thing has spread way past the political sphere everywhere now. And so that's when we decided, all right, I think this is worth devoting an entire conference to take head on. And that's what gave us the idea.
Yeah, that's good. I think when you see things being expressed politically, that's sort of like the tail end of a process then, right? I mean, there are the church certainly, and, we've known some people like Kevin Lewis, for example, who's going to be one of the speakers at the conference, who has certainly been dealing over the decades with new spirituality, new age, occult, cults, and so on and so forth. But it always seemed marginal. It always seemed fairly marginal. But then, come 2020, 21, 22, it's like all of a sudden you're seeing these manifest in the political sphere. And that's when you're like, okay, now the thing has just sort of arrived. And it may not have been super explicit, But then once we started scratching the surface and seeing that there was like, an explicit embrace of folk religion and named, deities from pre-Christian religions and stuff in school districts and school curricula and stuff, then you're like, well, as soon as you scratch that surface, or when you start looking into like the connection between the LGBTQ plus movement and the occult, which is what they embrace. I mean, it's something that was promoted not too long ago at a series of conferences at USC, just up the road. So once you start scratching their surface, like, oh, this goes a lot deeper. And, for a long time there was these Barna studies and stuff were coming out, and they were talking about the spiritual but not religious demographic. And I think for myself, at least, I was just kind of thinking, well, I was neglecting the spiritual part, thinking that they're probably just some kind of atheist, strict, or whatever. But it really was maybe negligent on my part, maybe others, to think that that's spiritual but not religious, that the spiritual part of that term or that phrase was not important or was not religiously meaningful. And I think it is. So, Jacob, now let me ask you this. So as far as I can tell, something's telling me, I'm getting sort of a sense that you and Prashanth maybe were not born in a Western culture. I don't know exactly what it's. I can't put my finger on it exactly, or at least maybe your parents weren't born in a Western culture.
How did you come to that conclusion?
That you were born maybe somewhere in the East, or your families are from the East, which tells me you might have some. I'm joking, obviously. But given your Indian background, you guys are coming from a pantheistic culture, right? And polytheistic culture, pantheistic polytheism. So I feel like you might have some better insight into this worldview as it cashes out. Because at the end of the day, one thing I think we'll recognize is ontologically, all paganisms are fundamentally, as to use Peter Jones's term, oneisms, right? There's only one thing, nature. It's shot through with divinity. So maybe give us a bit of insight from your own background coming from India and how that sort of cashes out socially.
Yeah, you touch on something very important, and I've been saying this for a while now, that the West has become Hindu, at least in its way of expressing culture. And I'll remind Prashanth about like 2 years ago when you had your conference, the first conference. I had the privilege of speaking there as well. And we covered this topic, the topic of oneism, the idea that the ultimate reality is one, and whereby the culture is trying to remove all kinds of distinctions, all kinds of boundaries. With regards to the paganism of today, and this is something I'll be speaking on, I really want to touch on the idea of eclectic paganism, the idea that it's drawing ideas of spirituality from different traditions. So what's happening now is that, and Hinduism in particular provides the groundwork or the framework to accommodate that kind of thinking. So it is not connected to any specific traditions anymore, given that there are so many people from other parts of the world have moved into the Western world. The accommodation has become even more forceful culturally. So if you see what's happening in Europe in particular, and how it's coming towards America as well, America for some reason seems to be a little more resistant still. But at the same time, we have seen time and again what happens in Europe kind of trickles down into what happens here in our borders. So that's something I will be touching on during my talk. So definitely there is you can't work with any kind of idea of paganism unless you actually work with the framework that's provided from this very idea of oneism, ultimate reality being one. So what I want to also focus on is, I'm coining a term here, and one of my talks will be on, or the talk that I'm giving would focus on, I call it culturistic, the characteristics in culture. How are we supposed to discern and understand the impact of paganism already happening, and how we can stand against it and provide a reasonable response to it as Christians? So definitely, yeah, there is, as an Easterner, when I look around, when I hear people, some of the statements they make, some of the ideas that they propose, be it through media, even in politics, even those who came to be Christians, I can see through and see that how much of Hinduism or the pantheistic idea has impacted. And this is interesting. I'll touch upon something that I think we'll all focus on, is that this new paganism, if I may use that term, or neo-paganism, is definitely, we are reviving the old gods, but these gods are wearing a different garb. They're looking something new. It's an interesting fact is that much of what we know of paganism is through the lens of the Christian interpretation of what went. They don't have their own documents to describe their rituals and everything as much as we would want them to, or those who are adopting paganism today would want that to be. So what they're trying to do is they're coming to a revisionist idea of paganism. And what they're saying is that we can root on whatever is available as tradition that we know of, the rituals that we know of, but we have to evolve. Right. So what we have today is a new kind of paganism. And I'll encourage our listeners to come and attend the conference to know what that looks like.
Yeah, and let me, that's good. And let me reiterate again, the conference is on April 12th at Gateway Seminary in Ontario, California. I'll show the flyer here in a second. And we have 6 speakers, 3 here that you're listening to right now. And then Carlos Pamplona, the co-founder of Reasonable Truth, and then Doctors Kevin Lewis, one of our former professors from Talbot School of Theology, Biola University, and Dr. Adam Grotza, who is a professor at Gateway Seminary. And again, that's April 12th at Gateway Seminary in Ontario, California. So, Prashanth, what are some of the topics that we are going to deal with? I know, so Jacob's doing sort of a kind of an overview of how we're seeing paganism manifest in the culture. Who else is, what other topics are we going to be touching on for the audience?
Yeah, no, we're going to be coming at this from a few different angles. We're going to talk about, I think you're kind of covering the sort of the CRT angle of it, and I'm going to be covering the environmental angle of this, the sort of eco-paganism, if you will, and the environmentalist movement and what that looks like. And in my plenary, I'll be kind of giving a 30,000-foot view of sort of the resurgence, or the resurrection, if you will, is probably the more accurate term, the resurrection of paganism. And so, and I think Kevin Lewis is going to talk about, I think his talk is going to be, in one sense, probably the most easily relatable when we think of the word paganism. Because when we think paganism, we're thinking like pre-Christian, polytheistic sort of trappings, like the Druids and, right, chanting and animism and all these kind of things. I think when people think paganism, that's sort of the image that comes to their mind. And actually, that's precisely why we're having this conference, is to say, well, no, because that creates a false sense of security for the church, because they assume that it's going to be purely religious or purely ceremonial or ritual when it's not. And like Jacob said, it's going to come in a different garb. It's going to come repackaged very differently. And this is why we need to keep the church alert to these kind of things. So anyways, Kevin Lewis is going to be talking about the paganistic angle for the occultism and, witchcraft and, Satanism and, those kinds of ancient practices of how paganism used to be. So we're trying to come at this from a few different angles. And I think we've spread it out pretty well. We're approaching it very broadly, and I think it's going to be good.
Yeah, so I am going to be trying to present on the synthesis of pagan beliefs and practices in politics, and the kind of I think the most glaring example of that is in theory is the critical race theory, and then the activism of groups like Black Lives Matter. And then I did mention that there is a there is a decisively pagan footprint in our school system as well. And I think hopefully people will come, because I think, we really need to hear about these very concrete actions of activists who are in pagans. They're believing and practicing pagans. And they're not, staying neutral with regards to the state and government. And that's not to demonize, no pun intended, these people. They're advocating for what they believe is true, a good, and a better view of society. But we will need to analyze their arguments and their beliefs, and also be able to engage with them.
It's interesting, Tony, that you mentioned, because I think they very well realize no such thing exists, the whole deception of neutrality, the idea that there is such a space in politics or even in the social sphere. They have realized that it doesn't exist, and that they are trying to install their worldviews onto the culture.
Yeah, and I think we just have to take that as a natural thing for any citizen to do. I mean, the rhetorical device used against Christians is, oh, you're trying to influence politics and government and institutions. You're a Christian nationalist. But everybody's trying to do that, including our pagan counterparts, right? So, or most of them, not all of them, but a lot of them.
Right. I wanted to piggyback on something Jacob said earlier, because I don't want to lose the impact of that. It's interesting to me. C.S. Lewis said, I forget where he said it, but he said something to the effect of, if he had not been an atheist, he would have been a pantheist.
Yes,
and it's very right. It's very interesting, because that is precisely why that worldview is so attractive to the Western mind. And I think even when I was on your show a couple of years ago, we talked about this phenomenon of what I called the Easternization of the West, right? And so there's pretty much the same thing that Jacob had alluded to earlier, is that there is a sort of worldview. It's basically repackaged Hinduism is what it is. And it's coming back. It came back as the New Age movement. And now it's coming back in an even, like you get these products that are 33% more in a new design. It's that basically that's what it is.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and it's really, really appealing, especially to the demographic that holds to the spiritual but not religious sort of ethos. And so it is very dangerous if we do not help Christians identify it and then discern it.
Well, definitely and then we in have culture, we've seen a disillusionment against modernity, but we fail to recognize that postmodernism and the ideas that it's been promoting had been a hook to actually get the culture and move it towards paganism.
Probably maybe several of the people that we'll actually reference who were astute observers, thinkers in the 50s, 60s, and 70s were already seeing the writing on the wall as far as sort of the scientific view of reality, that would reduce everything down to blind material and physical forces and causes, impersonal, mechanistic causes. And they saw that there a void was there, and that void was eventually going to get filled by something religious, right? And I think I referenced T.S. Eliot in the talk that I'll be giving, who was writing about this in 1938 and 39, that sort of where he thought that the West was at a turning point to either have something like a revivified Christianity and Christendom, or devolve into paganism. And one thing that I'll be arguing in the book that I'm writing on right now is that I think, as Prashanth pointed out with Lewis's observation, there really are only kind of two religious views of reality, right? There's the theistic religions, and there's the pantheistic ones. And I think, a lot of the pagans that I've been reading, Hinduism is kind of like the epitome. It's kind of like the highest form of cultured sort of paganism. Sometimes it's seen as that, it's the pagan civilization in history that has sort of attained, the great heights and so on and so forth. And then you have your more rudimentary Druids or Celts or Norsemen, running around in the woods. But at the end of the day, those are civilizational differences more than religious ones.
Yeah, I don't want to jump ahead of myself here. Maybe you have this as a follow-up question or something, but I do think it's a good time to say this, is that one of the other reasons why I think it is important to really lean into this is because the paganism of now, obviously, as we've discussed, looks very different than the paganism of the old. Now, one of the things we start to notice is this weird sort of hybrid co-opting of two different sorts of worldviews at work. So, for example, the Marxist worldview, the cultural Marxist worldview, is very much at work in the West. And in a sense, they're sort of co-opting paganistic worldviews. And it's become essentially this weird sort of social, political control Frankenstein that the both of them have become together. That's not to say that the paganism of the old did not have power dynamics. They certainly did. John Daniel Davidson points this out very well in his book, Pagan America. He talks about how a lot of the older civilizations that were pagan had slaves. Like slave, control was a major thing. Does it look like that now? No, but the tyrannical hunger for power is still not gone away. And it is very interesting to see how the sort of the confluence of Marxism, CRT, and on the other hand, the old sort of paganistic ideas are creating this new hybrid version of how are we going to lionize and deify all these different movements for power and control. And so I think that's an important angle that we're going to tackle as well.
There are a few aspects that kind of touches on the idea of paganism and the resurgence of it. Is we can't ignore the fact that it is driven economically as well, where the global market is shifting to the east. The other is the advancement in technology, the whole trans-paganism in one sense. That's taking place. And I think we might have some discussion on that as well during the conference too.
Yeah, I'm sure
that will be covered. Or techno-paganism.
Techno-paganism,
Glenn Sunshine would say.
Yeah. I think I wrote that before Glenn said it on his show. I don't know. We'd have to have a copyright battle over that, I think, if next time I see him.
You should claim it. Yeah. So I think we can't ignore these different dimensions that's not been present at the ancient way of understanding paganism. Yeah. So that is definitely impacting the way it is redefining itself and evolving. And it's going to have a certain kind of impact that's not been there in the past. So what it presents to us as Christians is a new kind of challenge. And the church needs to be prepared. And I might be making even a case during the talk is that we are at a very pivotal stage in culture around the world with the kind of technological advancement and things that are coming about in culture in different spheres. We have greater means by which we can tackle it. And I think we must stand on the promise of Christ that he is building the church. And one way this conference is going to help, I believe, is to help the church understand how we do that in light of these challenges that new paganism is presenting.
Yeah, I'm actually currently working on something which I will disclose at a later time. But I'm doing some research on sort of the intersection between technology, AI, and paganism as well. And I can definitely see a road where those things are going to come together in a very unexpected but pretty powerful way. Again, more reason for us to keep our eyes peeled.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. And I do have a chapter that dedicated to artificial intelligence or techno-paganism, artificial intelligence, and biotech, and how biotech might relate as well. And that's one that we talked about a little bit with Chris Wiley, and we've certainly talked about it with Carl Teichrieb as well. And so I mean, those are some massive issues. Especially the AI thing is pretty scary. So
it almost, even recently we did a conference here in Oklahoma this last fall, and I gave a lecture on AI and transhumanism. And even as I look at some of these transhumanist movements, I was thinking to myself, man, their creed might as well be, you too can be like God. It might as well be. It's pretty much the same thing, right? But that's what they're working toward.
I'm trying to think I got it over there. I won't grab it. On the back of Carl Teichreb's book, Game of Gods, like there are three things that human beings have always wanted. One is to have master over their destiny. Two is to be as gods, and three to define, to live forever. And it really is. It's that. There you go.
Sounds reads like that passage from Ezekiel, right, where the king of Tyre makes those 5 like I am statements. Yeah.
Yeah. So and we should just. I mean, that is what the human beings ultimately are still looking for, and is what they were looking for at the Tower of Babel, and it was attempted through politics in the last 100 or so years. Marx thought it could come through politics, the utopia. It's shifting a little bit now. It's shifting now to just straight up hard technology, right? So all these things are going to be on offer. And again, if you are in the Southern California area, or if you're anywhere within a 12-hour plane flight of Ontario, California, on April 12th, we're going to be getting deep into this and trying to offer some apologetic and theological answers to the pagan worldview as well. So it's the Reasonable Truth Conference, April 12th. I'm sorry. And the title is Gravity Conference. So it's even got a cooler title, although it's sponsored by Reasonable Truth in partnership. And we're partnering the Kirkwood Center guys here with Reasonable Truth and Gateway Seminary, which, by the way, is a good seminary if you're looking to do an advanced degree in theology, ethics, or philosophy of religion. So hopefully we'll see you there. Go to the website. What is the website?
It's reasonabletruth.org.
There you go. Not to be confused with Reasonable Faith. We understand that. So reasonabletruth.org. And we do hope that we will see you there at the conference. Thank you again for listening to this Theology and Ethics podcast of the Kirkwood Center. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit subscribe and leave us a comment below. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you all Saturday in a week. Till then.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Theology and Ethics podcast of the Kirkwood Center. Please take a moment to leave a review on your podcast app of choice. If this episode made you think of someone you know, please share it with them. If you want to get in touch with the Kirkwood Center, you can call or text us at 909-493-7799 or send us an email at contact@kirkwoodcenter.org. You can also visit our website at kirkwoodcenter.org. If you want to join the theology and ethics conversation and see more content, you can find the Kirkwood Center on Facebook, Instagram, X, and YouTube and Substack. Until next week, my name is Anthony Costello. Thank you for listening to the Kirkwood Center podcast, and we look forward to hearing from you. Until then, God bless.